Hello, cultural studies class. We're here to discuss ancient Greece. First, I'm going to open up a map and make sure you know where ancient Greece was. First off, gotta tell you, at the time that we're actually talking about, there was no such thing as the country of Greece. It was just a bunch of people that lived in towns that spoke the same language, which was Greek. So these are like Greek lands, but there was no country called Greece at this time. So here we are in Kazakhstan. We're down here in this bottom right corner. Nur Sultan is up north of us. Just in case you didn't know that, now you do. We are down here. Kyrgyzstan is, Nur Sultan is up there, and we're talking about way over here in Greece. Now I'm going to zoom in. Going to zoom in again. Okay, I think that's good enough. So all of this, we're talking about all of this land, including all these islands here. This big island down here is called Crete, C-R-E-T-E, and it's part of this land too. All the people that lived on all these little islands in here, all this land, they all spoke Greek. So we're talking about this land. And then there's an important part down here that talks to you about a peninsula. A peninsula is an area of land that comes off the mainland and juts out into the water. Italy is a peninsula. It's not an island. This place right here, this is an island because it's all surrounded by water. A peninsula is connected to the mainland, but juts out into the water. Italy is a peninsula. All of Greece is a peninsula, but then off the main land peninsula of Greece, there's another peninsula. Look at that. This part, let's see what happens if I go in again. This is a peninsula off the peninsula. And this peninsula here is called the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Don't freak out that I'm not spelling those for you because I will be in just a minute. I just want to show you first. So, oops, I meant to go the other way. Okay, so because Greece juts out into the water, all of Greece is a peninsula. But then at the bottom of Greece, there's a peninsula off the peninsula, and that peninsula is called the Peloponnesian Peninsula. So all this land, all these islands in here, this big island of Crete, all of this was land where people spoke Greek. Here's the Aegean Sea, here's the Ionian Sea, and here's the Mediterranean Sea down here. These are all things you need to know where they are. Let me back up a little bit. So Greece, this body of water in here is called the Aegean Sea. This body of water over here is called the Ionian Sea. And then when you get out of these gulfs, see where it goes in like this? That's a gulf. When you get out of the gulfs and you come down here, this is the Mediterranean Sea. Aegean, Ionian, Mediterranean. All right. Now that I've told you all of that, let me go back to my whiteboard. Okay. Ancient Greece. About the year 2000 BCE, and we know that's 4,000 years ago we are talking about here. Let me make a better line. If we're in the year 2020, that's what year we are, and we're talking about the year 2000, we're talking about 4,000 years ago. People entered into these lands of Greece from the north. So let me move this map down. There were people living up here, and they slowly went further south, and they moved into this land here. So it was about 4,000 years ago that people settled and started living here. And in Greece, there were lots and lots and lots and lots of mountains. Almost like, this is kind of what Greece looks like. No, let's make it a little bit better. No, I still can't do it. It's more like a triangle. This is kind of what Greece looks like. Greece is almost all mountains. These are mountains. And you can't farm in mountains. You can graze sheep, you can graze goats, whatever, but you can't really farm. The only place that people can farm is in here, in the valleys in between the mountains. But there are way more mountains than there are farms. So they had a really, really hard time farming. Also, these mountains were big and tall, and it would take days to get over them. You know, there were no cars back then. There were no airplanes back then. People had to actually walk over the mountains. Do you want to walk over those mountains that are right over there? Those mountains that you can probably see out of the window of your house? Do you want to walk over those mountains just to go see what's going on in the town next door? No. Well, the ancient Greeks didn't want to either. So their little towns that grew up in these valleys, they were their own independent thing. And they had, the only thing they really had in common with the people in the next valley over was they all spoke the same language. But their government, the way their cities worked, they might be different. Now, what they did have, what the Greeks did have, let's go back to that map, was look, they have so much access to the water. Someone that lived right here maybe knew absolutely nothing about someone that lived right here, right next to them. Like, they might live here and they've never, ever, ever in their entire life been here. But they might live here and they've been down here to Libya 15 times. They could easily hop on a boat. They could come over here to Turkey. They could go up here to Bulgaria. They could go to Egypt, Liberia, Algeria. They could go to Italy. They could come all the way up here to Slovenia. They could go around over here to Spain. They could go to Morocco. They had all kinds of access to other cultures, other countries, other people, but they didn't have much interaction with other people that spoke their language. Their climate was Mediterranean. Mediterranean. Oh, no, I always mess it up. It's 2 R's and 1 N. Mediterranean climate. And a Mediterranean climate means they had mild, wet winters. Mild means it never really got too cold there. It doesn't ever really get cold, cold, cold in Greece. And then they had hot, dry summers. So in the winter, it rained a lot, but in the summer, it didn't rain much, it was dry. And because of this, they couldn't, even the farms that did exist, they couldn't grow things that so many of us have come to love, like wheat. You use wheat to make bread. Everybody likes bread. All around the world, there's not a culture in the world that doesn't have some kind of bread. Everybody likes bread. Well, the Greeks loved bread, but they didn't have any way to make it. What they were really good at was fishing. These people could fish. And so they're right here with all this water around them. They can go fishing. And then they could come up here in France, and there are different fish here than here. So they could sell their fish. They could come over here to Italy and sell their fish. And they would say, hey, I'll trade you my fish for your wheat. So then they could go back to Greece and make bread, because everybody wants bread. I want bread. I'm making myself hungry right now. I want to stop recording and go downstairs and eat some bread. What they could also grow, well, they didn't grow fish, but what they could grow was grapes and olives. Grapes and olives both grow really, really well in a Mediterranean climate. What can you make from grapes? Wine. Everybody likes wine. Not you, because you're 12, but I bet your parents drink wine. Even if it's just occasionally, you have to have grapes to make wine. Everybody likes wine, and everybody likes olives. Olives taste yummy. I love olives. Olives taste yummy, but also we use oil from olives to cook with. So anywhere these people went, if they wanted to make bread, all they had to do was sell their grapes and olives and fish, and bam, they can make their trade. Clear this off. I've told you guys I would spell Peloponnesian Peninsula, and I forgot. So I'm going backwards for just a second. Peloponnesian Peninsula. So now you know how to spell peninsula and Peloponnesian. Okay. Now, there was this one culture of people that spoke Greek, so a Greek culture that lived on the island of Crete. I showed you where that was, but let's do it again. Here's where all the Greek people lived, this island down here. This is the island of Crete. And there was this culture that lived there of the Minoans. And the Minoans were really advanced compared to the other Greek cultures. These were like futuristic people. They, I know it sounds silly now, but for the time, they were crazy futuristic. These people could read and write. These people had running water. These people built huge buildings, gigantic temples. It was just amazing for the other people when they went and saw this culture. It was very, very progressive. And the Minoans had a pretty big influence on Greek people. One community they had a really big influence on was the Mycenaeans. Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were heavily influenced by the Minoans. And the Mycenaeans made metal. They made bronze, and that was amazing. I know there is not a single child in my class that could go dig up rocks and make metal out of it. You can't do that right now in 2020. These people were doing it 4,000 years ago. They figured out how to make metal out of rocks. These were some smart, smart people. They made bronze. They made beautiful pottery. Hope you know what pottery is. Pottery, like plates and bowls and pitchers for pouring water. And they were really rich. They were rich because they were amazing at trade. These people, I mean, they could make metal weapons out of melting down rocks. Nobody else knew how to do that in this area. So they could go anywhere they wanted and they could sell their weapons that they made. They could sell their beautiful pottery and they would get like 500 fish for one sword. They were really, really rich. Mycenaeans, the Mycenaeans. Whew. But about the year in the 1100s BCE, let's go. I always like to draw here's us, 2020. Here's 2000. So if this is 2000 and this is 0, then about here, the 1100s BCE, they grew weak. And when they grew weak, a peoples called the Dorians from the north came down and overtook them and destroyed them. When they were destroyed, it went to all the Greek lands, completely forgot how to read and write, forgot how to read and write. They lost their ability to make running water. And everybody just kind of went back to living in huts or whatever, just basic people. And these were called the Greek Dark Ages. We say Dark Ages because we think of the light, like the light is when, think about, I bet your mom has said, oh, a light bulb went off in your head when something finally made sense. When you're learning new things and you're progressing and you're doing better and better, you're using the light. And then when all of that stops, you're in the dark. So these were the first Greek Dark Ages. The Dark Ages lasted from 1100 BCE to 700 BCE. And during the Dark Ages, people from here migrated. They migrated this way. Migrated means to move. Basically, they moved. They moved across the Aegean Sea. This was the Aegean Sea here, to some lands along here in Asia Minor. This area is called Asia Minor, and that's because this is Asia over here. And the further and further and further west you go in Asia, you get closer and closer to Europe. Officially, this land over here is still part of Asia, but they're a whole lot like Europe. So this is Asia Minor. And they settled up here and they called this land Ionia. Ionia. And the people in Ionia, they used to tell stories about the good old days. And they would tell these wonderful stories about before the Dark Ages, when Greece was wonderful and everything, one great, powerful people lived and awesome things happened back a long time ago. And one of those stories was the story of the Trojan War. And in the Trojan War, people from here were fighting with people over here. And the war had been going on for 10 years. It just wouldn't stop. They were fighting. The people from Athens thought of this brilliant way to win the war. The people from Athens made a gigantic wooden horse. And they went to the great gate to the city of Troy. This was Athens versus Troy. And Troy had a big wall all around their city with one gate. You had to let down the gate so people could go across it. Athens made this large wooden horse for the people of Troy. And they showed up at the gate and they said, "We've made you a gift. It's a present from us to you." And the people of Troy were like, "Oh, that's so sweet. You made us a present." And so they opened the gate and they brought the horse in and they set it up in the center of their city. And late that night, when it was really dark in the middle of the night, a door from inside the horse dropped down, and soldiers that had been hiding inside the horse went down to the ground very quietly, snuck to the gate, opened the gate, let it down, and the Athenian soldiers rushed into the city of Troy, killed everybody, attacked the Trojans, and that's how they won the war. So that's the story of the Trojan horse. And these stories were told forever. And this guy, Homer, made poems, made an epic poem. Epic means crazy long. An epic poem about the Trojan War. And at the time of Homer, people didn't read and write. He did this whole thing in his head. And he made his students memorize his epic poems. And then they made their students memorize it, and then they made their students memorize it, and then they made their students memorize it. And eventually, one day, people learned how to read and write again, and somebody wrote it down. But his first poem that he wrote was the Iliad. And the Iliad is a poem about the Trojan War, but his poem ends before the end of the war. It ends before the end of the war. And then there was another epic poem called the Odyssey. And the Odyssey is about a soldier named Odysseus. And Odysseus that's an E. a soldier named Odysseus that fought in the Trojan War. And it's all about his battles and his life fighting in the war. I promise you, at some point in your life, you will read these poems. The Iliad and the Odyssey are two of the most famous poems on earth. You'll read them sometime. Maybe we'll read them in class. I don't know. Okay, so these stories from Homer's poems, these stories helped to like form Greek culture. These poems had like, there was so much bravery and so much strength and so much, that's supposed to be GTH, sorry, strength in these poems and honor. And the Greek people wanted to live up to that. So the Greek people were very proud of their bravery and their strength and their honor. Okay, so a little bit more and then we're going to be finished. The communities. I'm going to draw my little Greek peninsula again and my mountains. Lots and lots and lots of mountains in Greece. And there were little communities set up in between the mountains. And I call them cities, but they were city-states. And what makes them a city-state is each one had its own government. They had their own form of government. Some of them were monarchies, some of them were aristocracies, some of them were democracies. I'll tell you what all those things mean in just a minute. A monarchy is led by a king. An aristocracy An aristocracy is led by the rich. And a democracy is led by the people. So each one of these city-states had its own government, and they were all a little bit different. And the Greeks, these people, they called their city-states a polis. Each one of these little independent city-states was called a polis. And side note, the word polis led to our word politics. And politics, the word politics means the art and practice of government. So anyone that's listening to my voice right now, all of you, even the parents that are listening, because I know you're out there, our total idea of politics is based on how the Greeks ran their polises 4,000 years ago. All right, so each polis had 2 levels. And I mean physical levels. I'm going to erase this because, we're in mountainous areas, so there were lots of hills too. They would build their polis on a hill. The top of the hill was the Acropolis. And up here is where they had their temples and their government buildings. So people would come here to have like government meetings and to worship. And then as you go further down the hills, this is where people lived, people had their shops, people had their restaurants, marketplaces, all that stuff. So Acropolis means high city. So they kind of set up their polises like there was a high city and a low city. Acropolis was the top where all the really important stuff happened. An Acropolis could also be used for something else. If there were bad guys coming from any direction to attack them, they could all run up to the Acropolis to hide up here, to hide and to defend themselves. It's easier to defend yourself from the higher ground because you're up high and your enemy's coming down low. You can fight them off better that way. And in the democracies, which we're going to talk about more later, in the democracies, all citizens could vote. The thing is, though, not everybody was a citizen. The citizens were the men that were born there. The men that were born there were the citizens. No women, no slaves, and no foreigners. It doesn't matter how long you had been living there. If you weren't born there, you weren't going to vote. All right, we're done. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me find my stop.